So
Okay,
next up,
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, JP. No, please.
No, I was going to say thank you so much. As you heard from Dr. Lee, one of our distinguished co-fellowship directors, and now she'll be accompanied by Dr. Renee Williams. So thank you both.
Okay, so
thank you. Go ahead, Renee. You want to introduce yourself? I think they met me already.
my name is Dr. Williams. I've been involved with this fellowship for a year now. I can't believe a year has passed, and we're now in our second cohort of fellows. I'm one of the co-fellowship directors. I'm also a gastroenterologist at NYU and a newly appointed associate chair for health equity. I used to be a program director as of like 3 months ago, but that changed. And Dr. Lee and myself will be talking about taking your teaching to the next level, why and how to publish diversity-related educational work. And for me, in terms of academics, I'm a clinician educator. That's the track that I'm on. So I guess, Rose, I'm turning it over to you.
Sure, great. So just to briefly go over our learning objectives for today. Again, we want you to recognize the value of publishing in medical education. We want you to come away from this, these workshops really excited to start your project, knowing how this is not only going to advance your careers, but really advance all of medical education and move us forward. We're going to talk about oops, wait a minute. This looks a little bit different, but okay, sorry. I'm a little disoriented. We'll talk a little bit more about the types of articles in medical education journals, sort of building on what the last workshop was. Talk again about why MedEd Portal is an important opportunity to publish your educational work, but really focusing on the diversity, equity, inclusion lens, which I think has brought so many of us to BenGAP, to this organization, because that really is the mission of the organization. And then we're going to talk about some recent successful submissions to MedEd Portal again. So what we keep saying we want you to value publishing in medical education, but what does it mean to you? We'd love to sort of hear from you guys, from our fellows. You can either raise your hand or put it in the chat board. Okay, great. So Valerie writes, to help disseminate our work more broadly. Terrific. And Delaney says, to be able to make an impact on a broader scale. Wonderful. Any other thoughts about this?
It's also important. So I'm starting to look for jobs now, and it's also important to help, I think, give you credibility in that arena.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's certainly, you know, for personal growth, right, in terms of sort of our own career developments, but really also for, if you think about who we are, oftentimes what communities we come from, who we represent, whose voices we want to speak on behalf of, including our own. I think that we can recognize how impactful publishing can be in medical education for those reasons too. So sort of the dissemination, someone said, you know, making an impact for the next generation, all of that is absolutely true. Great, next slide. Okay, and I love this quote, history isn't what happened, it's who tells the story. So again, I think, you know, when I sort of reflect as being a student and then a trainee and an attending and always looking in medical education literature or even just health, medical literature, it was very rare that I saw someone who looked like myself sort of writing these articles, telling these stories. So I didn't even realize how important that was, you know, and it was sort of, I guess, in that absence that it just never really dawned on me that I was missing, or that, you know, voices reflective of my own were missing. But this quote, I think, really brings it back. You know, history isn't what happened, it's who tells the story. So really, publishing is about telling your story, telling the story of your patients, telling the story of your community. And that's why I think, you know, particularly with this workshop, as this session, as we talk about writing and doing scholarly work on diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, and ultimately publishing on it, I think this is where it takes on not just professional significance, but a real personal significance as well. Next slide, Renee. And I know that Ray used this quote already, but again, I think it is particularly powerful. So I'm not going to read it again, but just to sit on this again for one more minute. again, I think for me, it sort of reminds me of how empowering it is, how we can really carry ourselves as well as our communities forward in the work that we do and the work that we publish. Thanks. Next slide. Okay, so publishing is a core competency. I think it draws upon lots of skills that we really need to become leaders, not just effective healthcare providers, but really leaders in our field as well. And I think that many of the workshops to come, particularly tomorrow, we'll talk a little bit more about these different skills involved. So critical thinking and writing is self-explanatory. There's a lot of networking involved that comes in the process of publishing. I think tomorrow we have a special session focused on networking. It is considered to be the cultural gold standard of communication, albeit in the academic environment. But as someone mentioned earlier, that as you think about sort of your own promotion and how you get your message across, what's the most effective way? Well, in academic medicine, it is through publications. Topic documentation and validation is something that we're going to talk about in just a little bit in the next slide. Really taking issues that matter to you and really bringing it to the forefront through your publications. Again, I talked about in the last session, my fellows last year who created an educational module on family planning for transgender couples and transgender families, really moved to do so by really their personal identities, their convictions, and wanting to make this more visible so that care providers could provide better care for the transgender community. So I think that's a really wonderful and effective example of what topic documentation and validation can mean through publications. And that goes alongside identity formation, really having yourself represented and others who look like you, who come from your backgrounds, your communities represented through publications is incredibly impactful and important. And it is an opportunity to combine service and scholarship as well. And we'll look at that in subsequent slides too. And then not to dismiss it, but really, I think we all want you to advance in your careers. And this is the way to do it. When it comes down to it, like we all want you to be wonderful clinicians, your service is really important. But when it comes time for tenure and promotion, these committees are always looking at the publications, at the scholarly output from faculty members. So this is really a way to do it. And Renee will talk in a little bit more about sort of this concept of pre-faculty development, which is so core to the work that BANGAP does. Next. Okay, so topic validation. This was a MedEd portal submission that came out in 2019, which was a module on LGBT health using video case discussions, introspective technique. At that time, actually, there was far less in the medical education literature on LGBTQ issues. I'm happy to say that there has been a lot more written about it recently, which is wonderful. But again, getting that work out there, disseminating it really validates this, makes these communities more visible, helps educate providers to take better care of these patients in these communities. So that's why it's so important. Next slide, Renee. Thanks.
So one of the things publishing does for you is also help you form your identity. I dislike this photo, but I guess it's up there permanently. So it helps you as a faculty member, it helps you as a trainee to kind of figure out where do you want to sit within the medical education world. So something that I do as a clinician educator is I talk a lot about educational scholarship. So while I was doing, as a part of my career pathway, when I realized I really liked medical education, I decided to get an advanced degree, and I got a master's for health profession education. And while I did that, I joined BANGAP in 2014 and developed this particular module called Introducing Trainees to Medical Education Activities and Opportunities. And now, how did this count twice? I submitted this to a national conference as an abstract. It was a part of the day-and-a-half academic medicine workshops that BANGAP have put down. And this particular workshop has been given now, I think, over 20 plus times, sometimes by me, sometimes by other faculty, and it became a publication in the medical education portal. So because I had an interest in medical education, even as a gastroenterologist, BANGAP enabled me to really expand within that space. And I'll tell you, when I went from being an assistant professor to an associate professor of medicine, all the work I've done with BANGAP played a heavy role in my promotion process.
Great. And I think, this is an example again of sort of what I mentioned earlier about visibility, finding people who look like you, who represent you. I mean, you have the role, you have the opportunity to do that for other trainees by publishing, by making yourself visible. So this is just an example. This is Dr. Hector Perez, Cristina Fernandez, Vanessa Salcedo, who worked on a MedEd portal module together, and really this module was actually describing what different faculty roles are in academic medicine, and highlighted these three individuals and the work that they do, their roles at their academic institutions, as a way to make those opportunities more visible for healthcare trainees. So that continues to be incredibly important. Next slide. Okay. And here, this is another example of a MedEd portal article, which was really about combining service or your personal passions with education to turn it into scholarship. So this is a MedEd portal submission that involved a lot of BenGap faculty, including Dr. Williams and Dr. Sanchez. The primary author was Dr. Silva, who's at the University of Puerto Rico, and they created a module called Taking Care of the Puerto Rican Patient, Identity, Health Disparities, and Access to Care, and really took, again, sort of their personal passions and wanted to highlight issues for patients for Puerto Rican patients in the communities. Next. Can you forward that, I think? Okay. Actually, if you can click all of them, we can sort of show. So after they created this educational module, they really delivered it in a variety of different venues. So they celebrated Hispanic Heritage Month at different medical schools and presented it as part of those celebrations at those institutions. They were at the National Hispanic Medical Association annual conference and presented a poster and workshop on it there. They were part of the LMSA and SNMA chapter meetings. They went to college campuses, including mine at City College, to deliver this. And it was really it was a service activity. I think there was a lot of increased awareness and service involved in it, but they turned it into scholarship because every time they delivered it, they collected a little bit more evaluation data on it, and were able to turn it into a successful MedEd portal submission as well. So I think this is a really nice example of using service and education, combining it into scholarship. Next slide. And these are just some slides taken from their workshop, which was delivered as a PowerPoint presentation with a discussion that they talk about, again, sort of different historical events which have impacted Puerto Rican community health, talked about tradition, genetics, diets, and health issues. Next slide. And they have expanded it, as you can see. Okay.
So when we think about pre-faculty development, you have to think about publishing and how does this help us in terms of diversifying academic medicine, because that's what we want to do here at BNGAP. We want to build the next generation of academic physicians. So pre-faculty development is providing trainees with foundational self-efficacy, knowledge, skills, and experiences to be successfully appointed and eventually promoted and tenured within an academic institution, published by Dr. Sanchez in 2019. And if you're in the writing fellowship as a trainee, again, this helps you develop your identity, some self-efficacy, and give you some skills and experiences around publication. And if you're a faculty member, it helps you increase your promotion potential, because again, the point of this particular writing fellowship is to have a publication at the end. And as I mentioned in the past, I have a few publications in MedEd portal, and those all played a role in my promotion, because when I had to be promoted on the clinician educator track, the minimum requirement for me from assistant to associate was to, I think, 7 to 8 publications within medical education. So one thing I'll say, if you're looking at appointments or promotions along a specific track, find out what the metrics of those promotional tracks are, because I could have multiple publications, but if I didn't have a specific number within medical education, then I would not be considered for promotion. So if you're looking at the workforce demographics, specifically speaking, breaking down U.S. medical school faculty. So for example, looking at Black physicians, it makes 4% of the U.S. physicians are Black, but only 2.8% of them are medical school faculty. Now looking again at Latinx or Hispanic, 5.4% are US physicians, 3.8% are medical school faculty. If you're looking at Pacific Islanders, the numbers are even smaller. And then other unknown is pretty equivalent. But if you're looking at 55% of US physicians are white, but 59.2% of them are medical school faculty members. So again, as you can see here, we have a lot of work to do. So what's the rationale for pre-faculty development? So we've seen a significant growth in the amount of medical schools that we have. NYU itself now has an NYU Long Island Medical School, which is I think 3 years. And since 2010, there's been a significant growth in the number of allopathic medical schools in the United States, with 14 new schools opening and another 8 now seeking credentialing through the LCME. So if you're looking at URMs, or those who are underrepresented in medicine, approximately 30% of that in the US, only 16% of medical students, 7% of faculty. And then we're looking at women medical students, we're now 50-50. And that trend has changed over time. We used to have, looking at gender balance, we used to have more male medical students, now that's equilibrated. But even though URMs make up 30% of the population, we only make up 7% of faculty and 60% of medical students. If you're breaking it down to LGBTQs, that's 6 to 8%. And then of the United States population, 8% of medical school students, we don't know how many faculty members. So what they have found, and JP has studied this, is that a lower proportion of URM medical students compared to their non-URM counterparts report an interest in academic medicine upon entering and graduating medical school. But what happens over time is that interest actually decreases. So as you can see here, if you're looking at evolution, I need a pointer, let me take a look, pen, here we go. So intent on a career in academic medicine, here's what you go, and they have years in medical school. So as you can see here, from the time they matriculate to the time they graduate and 4 years later, the chances of that interest in medical school career actually goes down. Hold on one second, let me find my pointer. All right, I guess I don't need a pointer. My apologies, I'm having some issues with the computer over here. So a lower proportion of URM medical students compared to their non-URM counterparts, they report an interest into academic medicine when they come in, but at 4 years later, guess what happens? A significant decrease in disinterest. And why is that? Now, if I were to ask the audience, why do you think this, if you're coming into medical school, why does the interest in academia decrease over time? I'm going to open that up for some audience reflections. You can put it in the chat or you can speak.
Honestly, I do wonder if some of it has to do with, there is a big difference, right? Or at least there's a perceived big difference in pay in academic versus in private practice.
True. That's part of it. And sometimes if you're looking at financial responsibilities, if you're from an underrepresented background or a lower SES background, you tend to have more loans. So you want to go in a place where you're going to make more money. So that also plays a role too. Any other comments? I think someone put something in the chat.
I also think the amount of work to be promoted and to be, I guess, a leader in the field, to some may be a little overwhelming. And I think that's part of the reason why a lot of people don't do it as well.
It can be. As someone who went through the process for associate professorship, I'm like, oh my God, this is a lot of work. In the end, it's worth it. And I've been asked to apply for full professorship, but I've declined because I'm like, I'm just not ready to put that work on just right now. And I think it depends on interest also. You can't be what you can't see. If you're looking at your faculty members and you're not seeing people who look like you, that also plays a role too. And that speaks to why we need to diversify academic medicine. And someone says lack of time and lived experiences of POC may influence whether they want to spend their career. And that is very true. If you're having a negative experience in medical school because you see the bias and you see what happens in the hidden curriculum of how you're treated, your chance of wanting to be within that environment is not a positive one. And we've seen a lot of articles written on, bias in academia and racism in academia. We know about institutional racism, et cetera. So as you go through those 4 years, there are all these different factors that come into play that decreases your interest in academia. Let me see here. And is that interest recultivated during residency? No. Looking at career choices in academic medicine, there is, as they progress through training, they also become less interested. So that interest is not recultivated. Let me go here. So if you look at something called the social cognitive career theory, and I know this career theory very well because I did my master's thesis on it, it's a new theory about career choices. And what they're saying is, what you have is your learning experiences. And what are your learning experiences? That's your personal inputs. That's your gender, race, ethnicity, disability, health status, and then background. things like mentorship, things that feed into you. What are your learning experiences? What's happening to you in medical school? How does that feed into who you are as a person? And those learning experiences directly affect your self-efficacy and your outcome expectations. What is self-efficacy? Self-efficacy is your ability to believe that you can do or succeed at something. And your outcome expectations are like, what do I expect when I do this? So for example, I say, if I'm going to be a gastroenterologist, I'm going to do the outcome of that particular choice is I'm going to do colonoscopies. So that's an outcome expectation. And that's a very, I guess, oversimplified way of putting it. But you could say, if I go into academia, here are my expectations. And what is my internal self-efficacy? Do I believe that I can be successful in academia? So those learning experiences feed into your self-efficacy and your outcome expectations. And that's really what drives your interest, goals, and actions. So this is called the SCCT theory. And I looked at this looking at GI fellows in terms of the choice between academia versus non-academia. And interestingly enough, I didn't find the same domains relations here. It actually came out differently. What I found in my particular study is that for people who are in fellowship, and now these are more end learners, not early learners, not medical students, an interest in teaching and research is why they went into academia, even with the concept that they knew they were making much less money. But this is an SAC theory that says, hey, if I think I can do it and I have a positive outcome expectation, then it's going to lead to an interest. And if you're looking at this particular writing fellowship, you want to increase your self-efficacy, you want to increase your sense of self and saying, I can publish, I can do academic writing, I can do research around things that are interesting to me. If I have an interest in DEI or an interest in LGBTQ health, I can do this research, I can do service research, and I can publish this. So we want to increase your self-efficacy specifically around academia and how to be successful and published within academia. And again, this goes into play. If you're looking at personal inputs, like URMs have less mentorship, we're not as mentored, and we have less role models. So those all come into play, and those come into play as your learning experiences. If you're not seeing yourself represented in your academic faculty members, then your own sense of self-efficacy is affected. And by being a part of Bain Gap and seeing all of us here today and the entire Bain Gap family that's been built over the last 10 plus years, you can see people who look like you, who represent you, who are doing academia and are very successful in that space. So this says most important slide, and JP, I'm going to ask you why. It says publishing during medical school is an important mediator to increasing the number of URM faculty. Why is that? Because what we're doing is we're saying if you believe that you can, publishing is a very important metric in academia. And if we can give you the self-efficacy and the skills to publish around whatever, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Whatever your niche is, or develop a niche, or what your passion is, then it could give you the sense that I can go into academia and here's a roadmap on how I can be successful. But JP, why is this the most important slide?
Because there's not a lot of research in terms of which factors are really protective or develop our URM students to become future faculty. So when we think about the literature, there's only like 1 or 2 papers, and both of the papers say if a URM student publishes during medical school, they're more likely, statistically more likely, to become a future faculty member.
Good point. So that's why it's the most important slide. So if we get you guys to publish as med students, we can almost have you as faculty members. And if we can get faculty members to publish, then we help you in terms of your promotion process. Interestingly enough, I just did a commentary on women editors and editorial boards within gastroenterology, because most of our editorial boards are male dominated. And we talked about how publishing actually is such a major metric, publish or perish, within academics, and how important it is to have women on editorial boards and women first office. Women first office. Someone also said here, it's also important too, because if you don't take the time to learn the skills early, it becomes more difficult when clinical demands come into play. And that's exactly right. No one ever teaches you academic writing. It's kind of like you kind of have to bundle through it as time passes. And those skills are extremely important in academia, because that's how you buy your time. That's how you might say, hey, I'm doing this, I'm doing research. That's my value. That's how you get grants and get protected time from clinical work. But it's important to have those skill sets, because it's not easy to learn and it does take time. The more you write, the easier it gets. And even sitting on editorial boards make a huge difference, because then you can get to read what other people are writing. But that's a very important point. If you don't have those skills early on, our academic writing skills, it becomes much more difficult later in life. So there are different journals in medical education. Academic medicine is one of the major ones. Let's see here. So someone says something in the chat also. but not impossible. Exactly. As Stephanie says, not impossible. You can do it. I'll tell you honestly, I did not learn to be an academic writer until later in my career as a faculty member. Not a skill I really had. And now that I'm writing more, it becomes easier and easier. So where can you publish your educational content? We talk about educational scholarship, and we know we have all these different journals like New England Journal of Medicine, but can you publish educational content? I will tell you, as a clinician educator and the clinician educator track over the last couple of years have become more prominent. And now these are tracks that exist within academic departments. Like I am on the clinician educator track, which means I'm not doing biomedical research. I do some as a part of my job. As a gastroenterologist, I do biomedical research, but most of the stuff I look into is really focused on education. So where can you publish this? Now, Academic Medicine, I think, is a premier med-ed journal, but you can also do JAMA, New England Journal, Science. So these are the biomedical journals, but what I'm finding is that they're more open now to publishing certain things. But in terms of medical education, you can do medical teaching and learning. It's a journal called Medical Education. Medical education portal, and some of them are GI biomedical journals have like a section called like mentoring education and training. So one of our major journals has a MET section that basically states medical education and training. So they are publishing educational work in that one section. So the journals within your specific field, the biomedical journals might actually have an area where they publish educational work. Other things to consider is like Journal for JGME, which is Journal of Graduate Medical Education. Now looking at a landscape of publishing, it varies. You can have very small or short pieces, or you can have more longer pieces. So here, word range is about 400 to 3,000, depending on what you're writing. So like a letter to the editor might be 400 words. If you're doing a commentary, it's usually 1,000 to 2,000 words. And if you're doing like original research or an educational work, a report, you might need 3,000 words or more. So this also names some of the other educational journals. So you have JGME, Journal for Graduate Medical Education, Medical Teacher. You can publish patient narratives. You can publish commentaries. So commentaries tend to be more invited commentaries. It's not really, you don't really give a commentary in. Most times as you're a faculty member, you get invited to do commentaries. And those tend to be around 1,500 or 2,000 words. And you can comment on normally the commentary is on an article that was published. So my commentary that I mentioned, I just did on editorial boards it followed to an article that came out from a group looking at gender composition within GI editorial boards of the top journals. So that was published, and then the journal reached out to me and say, hey, given your background, would you mind writing a piece on this specifically? So there are different things that you can do. Innovation reports. Sometimes you might want to shorten things. That innovation report is kind of within the 1,000 to 2,000 word range. Patient narrative, new ideas. Anything else? Any comments on that, JP or Rosa, since you've both extensively published yourself? You can do research letters. Those tend to be shorter also. They tend to also have like a limitation on how many references you can have. So there are different ways you can publish too. Just remember that. And of course, the centerpiece of our writing fellowship is Medical Education Portal, which is now very nicely an open access journal that is now PubMeded, or except for Medline indexing. That's extremely important because a lot of times when you're giving in publications, a metric they use is a PMID. And that's a metric also for, what's the word? Why am I blanking on words? It's also a metric for promotion, like how many PMIDs, because you can publish in journals, but if they're not peer reviewed and they're not PMID, it doesn't count as much. So the good thing about MedEd Portal, I think 2 or 3 years ago, they got indexed into Medline. Was it that? JP, how long ago did it get indexed?
I don't know I think in the past 3 years, I don't know if Sarah or Dupe is on the phone on the call, but I think in the past 3 years.
So somewhere around that time, they got Medline. And it's important because what happened when they got Medline, can anyone guess what happened once it became PubMeded? Anyone? Going once, going twice?
You get way more views.
They got that, but what happened? What do you think is the consequence of them getting PubMeded? That actually affects their people who submit for publication. You're on the right track though.
Did the acceptance rate go down?
Exactly. Once they became PubMeded, they got a lot more applications, a lot more submissions, and their acceptance rate went down as expected because now they're on PubMed. It's a peer-reviewed medical and dental educational resource that have been, it publishes peer-reviewed medical and dental educational resources that have been implemented and evaluated. Just by a show of hands, how many people have actually used or seen Meded Portal or read anything off Meded Portal? I'm just curious. So everyone's pretty much raising their hands. So I don't know why, I probably don't need this slide then. I'm telling you what you already know. And it's self-contained, so they have different materials, or they might have a call for publications. But what project are you going to do within the context of this writing fellowship? The expectation is that this is going to be submitted to Meded Portal at the end and published after review by JP, myself, or whoever your co-writing fellowship director is. So whenever you have your project together, send it to your writing director and also JP, and we will look at it, give you feedback on it before you submit it. So they also have call for submissions. So one of the things they have a DIHE collection, diversity, inclusion, and health equity. And currently one of the call for submissions they have is an anti-racism in medicine. So if you have anything within these umbrellas, an anti-racism in medicine, there's a current active call out for submissions for an anti-racism in medicine series. Any other comments on that, JP? Nope, thank you. Don't you like how I just keep pulling you into the talk? Yes, he's shaking his head. JP and I go way back. We went to college together in the late 1990s. I'll put that out there.
You don't need to share all of that information, Renee.
Come on, we're mature people. We graduated college in 1996. It's been that long, right? Rosa is laughing.
No, I'm a 96 graduate too, so that's why I'm laughing.
The time passed quickly, wow. So to this date, they have published over 100 modules in their DIE collection. And you can see some of the titles here. For example, Active Learning on Center Stage, Theater as a Tool for Medical Education. I'm gonna get another pointer or arrow. Exploring Racism in Health, Intensive Interaction Sessions with Medical Students. The Case of Ty Jackson, an interactive module on LGBTQ health, employing introspective techniques, mentoring across differences. Let me see here. Someone said 2019, which did lead to a large, yes. Kathy said 2019, I think so. It definitely increased their submissions because now people are also realizing that they can publish educational work. In the past, we did all these teaching and everything else. We did a curricula, did workshops, and we never thought, hey, I can publish this and this can become something that I can actually build my career on. As you can see here, Social and Structural Determinants of Urban American Indian, Alaska, and Native American Health. So these are some publications that within the module that's been there for a very long time. And it's an opportunity to publish. You can publish on unique health issues in the diaspora, African, Hispanic, Asian, European. You could do service, medical Spanish, unconscious bias. If any of these fall within your arena, here's a place that you can publish any of those workshops or academic teachings. And I'm going to turn this back over to Rosa.
Sure. I'm going to finish off with a few more examples. But again, as Renee was saying, I think, in the beginning, I talked about sort of identity and how that can be showcased through publications. I think here, particularly with these calls for a specific anti-racism curriculum, health equity curriculum, I think it's really about sort of moving the needle forward socially as well through publications too. So I think this is the perfect time to do it. I think, again, I'm going to make the assumption that pretty much all of us here who are part of BENGAP are really committed to these issues. So again, this is a great area. If you don't have a project yet or a focus yet for your educational project, to really think about creating one in one of these arenas. So this is one example of a recent Meded portal that fell under their diversity, inclusion, health equity, the series, Interrupting Microaggressions in Healthcare, a guide for teaching medical students. So this was a workshop that was given to third-year medical students in the intersession in their clerkships, where they had actual cases of providers who had experienced microaggressions and developed sort of a workshop to help the students sort of work through what these incidents were, how to respond to it, to share. And I think, again, now this article came out. I'm sorry if I can't see the date. I don't see the date here. I think, certainly at my institution, microaggressions have a lot more recognition and are being addressed. But, when this probably first came out, I think this was a relatively new concept and sort of using that as a focus for a teaching activity and sort of what that and thinking about sort of the impact on the learners. So this is one nice example. Next slide, Renee.
Actually, so this was done at NYU, and I did this.
Oh,
Yeah, I know all
cool.
these.
Okay,
So
great.
we had small groups, and we had pieces of paper that we had real stories on, like, students and faculty would write real stories, and would kind of read it out to the students in the group and say, hey, let's discuss this particular situation. So all the case scenarios here were real stories that we got from students.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Awesome. Okay, great. And then this example is a neat one about health equity rounds. It's called Interdisciplinary Case Conference to Address Implicit Bias and Structural Racism for Faculties and Trainees. And again, I think that there's obviously been a lot more interest and sort of recognition of the importance of structural racism and its impact on health. So the topic itself is timely and relevant, but I think the sort of delivery mode and who the audience of the learners were also made this a novel submission, and one that was accepted for publication. So this was a series, a health equity round series, which was created at a medical institution, and it was really delivered to trainees and faculty alike. So they did it together. I sort of, the way it's described is sort of imagine it as like a grand rounds kind of scenario, which was a series of conferences over 2 years on health equity, structural racism topics, teaching about implicit bias. And so this again is something I think that many institutions are now doing with a lot more frequency. But maybe even just 1 or 2 years ago, I think there was probably far less written about it at that time. I think that's it. Next slide. Maybe there's one more summary. So just to wrap up, and Renee, you can jump in as well. I think we tried to cover a fair number of topics. The issue of pre-faculty development, right? How we can use this to advance our careers, but really, as many of us do come from diverse backgrounds in medicine, how we can sort of contribute to building that diversity in academic medicine, which again is critical to the entire mission of BENGAP. But using publications as a mechanism to advance ourselves within academic medicine and diversify the field. Really thinking about transforming our experiences, or our identity, our experiences, our passions, and what matters to us into scholarship, and thinking broadly about it, not just about sort of teaching biomedical topics, but really teaching about issues and identity, and sort of in a meta level, thinking about the process of becoming a physician, and seeking careers in academic medicine, turning that into scholarship as well, as Renee showed in her own work. And then just again, reinforcing the ways that MedEd Portal is so accessible, really to publish our medical education scholarship, but in recent years has taken a particular focus in DEI work and health equity, and can help build your own self-efficacy, right? So as you create these modules and create these submissions, that you are actually positioning yourself more strongly for a career in academic medicine. Renee, did you have any other comments?
That's it. Just I think in the agenda, there are some references that I put in. There's an ebook in there about how to go from thinking to publishing in medical education work. It's a link that has an ebook from AAMC, but I think there's a third link. It's called Conduct Your Research in Health Professions Education ebook. For those of you who are interested, I highly recommend looking at it. It's a bunch of last pages from Academic Medicine Journal. And any questions, thank you again, and thanks to BENGAP for inviting me to speak today. Any questions, comments? Stop sharing, there we go. And I think Dr. Lee is very busy today. You have another talk, right? 10 minutes.
So I know we're blazing through a lot of information. I think it's important for people really to share what have their experiences been around completing educational scholarship being publications, and whether they feel their home institution is supportive. So it would be nice to hear from some of the fellows as to whether what we think is important is truly valued at your institution, if anyone can speak to that.
I'll jump in.
Oh, go in. Go ahead, Kimberly. Yeah.
Sorry. I think I'm in a little bit of a unique situation because I'm at a startup medical college, and my position was created for the purpose of helping clinicians become scholar practitioners. And so My role is to foster publication and research and scholarship amongst not only the students who need it to get into residency, competitive residencies, but also amongst our faculty. So for my part, my institution has been incredibly supportive and has dedicated resources early.
And how do you think, Kimberly, this program can help you in fulfilling your responsibilities? Like, what are you hoping to get from this fellowship?
Well, I'm really old, so I'm not beginning faculty. I'm actually a full professor. I've been published. But what's really important to me is I'm coming from traditional graduate education where I've served almost 2 decades as an administrator up to provost. Learning what's different about medical education has been so important for me coming from other programs, other disciplines. I'm a psychologist by training. Getting familiar with the publishing opportunities in medical education has been amazing. And I know I'll be able to pass that on to not only our faculty, but our students. The other thing I think that's really exciting about where I'm at and about this program is that it's part of our core mission to serve the underserved. And we are constantly thinking about ways to promote underrepresented persons. So hearing what's happening in the field has been very enriching for me. So thanks to all of you for sharing so much.
Thank you for your work and sharing that. And it sounds like there's a potential for you to create something that will either be in its own version faculty development for your faculty, or to encourage your trainees to take this on as a career area to develop their own scholarship. Thank you.
That's exactly what I'm thinking. Thanks.
Anyone else?
So where I went to residency, they were very supportive of research and they loved research. The chair of our department was very big on research. He was very big on scholarly work, but I feel like a lot of that scholarly work was clinical, not really med ed. And so towards the end of year 2, I was like, I really like med ed and I really enjoy teaching, but I became overwhelmed because everyone's like, well, you have to publish. And I'm like, no one has really taught me how to write. And I really struggled with that. And I was like, well, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I shouldn't do this. And so when I decided to do a med ed fellowship, and I'm currently in my master's program now, I jumped at the opportunity to do this because I'm like, I really don't know how to write and I'm not a great writer. And so I was like, I kind of need that extra step to kind of help me write and be with people who have been published. And that's why I'm here. And also I just feel like that's not really something that's taught well in residency or in general.
So sorry, go ahead.
So I was just going to mention that. I'm at ET Health San Antonio, and I think at an institutional level, I think they're starting to value, especially these publications in medical education and medical education research. But it's been a slow progression, and so at our system level, UT has a ET Shine Academy that actually gives grants for potential medical education projects or educational projects. And so we have that opportunity, but not having experience in medical education research, I had no, that cycle has come up again, and having that opportunity to apply for a grant, I had even started to think, how would I even use that? Like, what do I need money for? I need money for time, but I don't know how to utilize that. So going forward, I think that's hopefully something I can learn, because certainly grants, not only publications are recognized as a faculty member, but also grants are really recognized. So hopefully we can come up with ideas about going forward after this year ends, how I could utilize grant money in an educational project.
M&A, I think you have your hand up, your virtual hand up. Oh, you're muted.
Merit Portal has a wonderful template that helps you to start to write your ESR. So I would really encourage you to look at that. And I think, Cindy, you have a good idea. Maybe there's a niche that needs to be filled, how to write a scholarly work from a standpoint of a early starter, and that could be one of your project maybe. And I just wanted to let everybody know that Cindy was my student several years ago, so it's so nice to see her here. Yeah.
I wanted to add to that, if it's okay. Emmett, I'm glad you brought up the ESR, because it is a very clear sort of step-by-step process. So if you follow it, you're good, But I think also for sort of those of us who are really new to publications and writing, I think actually those perspective pieces, the opinion pieces, I think are really wonderful. I mean, because they're really broad. I mean, it could be about perspectives in clinical medicine, in your experience, or it could be about education as well. And I think that lets you, it's a little bit freer, like there's not really a template for that. So it just lets you kind of just, sort of really write from your heart, which I always think is a really good place to start. And I think that there's a really receptive audience for that now, even more than ever before. So that's just something too. And a lot of times, like, again, I encourage you guys to look at those journals, look at their submission criteria. They will tell you exactly what they're looking for and how to format it. So if you're just staring at like a blank, open document on Word, not knowing where to begin, I would say start there and see what the templates and what their suggestions are. And just write every day. I mean, Cindy, write, all of you, just write. It doesn't have to be good, but writing begets writing. And I think it's a muscle that you can develop very quickly.
I do think reviewing for journals helps you be a better writer too.
So yeah, I think you can start to look even for journals who are looking for review their papers. You will learn a lot from that, and you will gain the muscle, how to think, how to put things together. And just like Dr. Lee mentioned, write the parts that you feel most comfortable. That will give the courage that you completed something. I usually start with my materials. It's the easiest part, but it makes me feel that I accomplished something. And then I can build on to that. And it's a learned process. So don't think that you are born with it. Some of us are and some of us are not, but you can really learn it. And it's like a formulaic in a way that you follow that formula and it will work in many cases.